Imagine you're walking around one day and you're suddenly struck by a vision. Everyone is covered in a fungus. In fact, their entire body is riddled with it. And you look down in your horror and you see that you are too. This is the modern world. We are covered with a cognitive fungus. Actually, it's a yeast. And we're even yeasty, doughy. We're all fat. That's the unconscious calling. It's trying to send us a warning. We started taking this yeast in earnest about 50 years ago. It's been trickling in for several centuries, but 50 years ago is when it really started pouring in. And if we don't start burning this yeast off, each and every one of us, millions of us are going to die, and soon. They had forgotten to bring bread, and they had only one loaf with them in the boat. He enjoined them, "Watch out, guard against the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod," the yeast. They concluded among themselves that it was because they had no bread. When he became aware of this, he said to them, "Why do you conclude that it is because you have no bread? Do you not yet understand or comprehend? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes and not see, ears and not hear? And do you not remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many wicker baskets full of fragments you picked up?" They answered him, 12. "When I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many full baskets of fragments did you pick up?" They answered him, 7. He said to them, "Do you still not understand?" Then Jesus spoke to the crowds and to his disciples, saying, "The scribes and the Pharisees have taken their seat on the chair of Moses. Therefore do and observe all things whatsoever they tell you, but do not follow their example. For they preach, but they do not practice. They tie up heavy burdens hard to carry and lay them on people's shoulders, but they will not lift a finger to move them. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You traverse sea and land to make one convert, and when that happens, you make him a child of Gehenna twice as much as yourselves." You know all those family members and friends who hate Christianity and hate their own kind and hate Western civilization that you can't even seem to talk to? Children of Gehenna, children of hell. And it's the same with those people who hate us homosexuals and have been lying about us for centuries and using the Bible to do it. They've even doubled down on that lately. Both of these groups are bound together in a mutual bond of feedback loop of hate and loathing. It's like one couldn't live without the other. A demonic Ouroboros. God knows I've tried to break through that. I comment, I talk, I make videos, I diligently search the scriptures, I pray constantly, and most importantly, as intelligently and as informed as possible, I say what I think, even though a lot of times I don't really want to. And how about those people who tell us that we're awful? You know, the ones who've been feeding us this yeast. We're awful because we want a wall on our border. We're awful because we love our guns and we hate gay marriage. Although I would grant gay marriage is a good idea, and long overdue. I noticed that in their own country, they have a big, beautiful wall, and they have open carry gun laws, and they do not have gay marriage. God forbid they lift a finger to follow their own rules. Jesus knew his own kind well. So far, I've given you nothing but bad news. But here's good news. Jesus has given us a way out. Maybe we'll die in our fungus-encrusted psyches, but we will not die in our sin. We will be saved. But if we die in our fungus-encrusted psyche, what good can our works be? And that's important because we are rewarded for our works in the next life, provided we accept Jesus' offer of salvation. The bad works are burned off in the fire of Christ's love. So that yeast is going to get burned off one way or the other. So you might as well burn it off yourself. And that way you can get some good works going. Fortunately, Jesus has given us a way out here as well. The Gospel of Mark. My first quote came from the Gospel of Mark. But why that Gospel in particular? Because it's modeled on the zodiac, and that caused a lot of consternation back in the beginning of the Christian era. The Gospel and the Zodiac by the Reverend Darlison proves that beyond doubt. It's basically going to be a textbook for this playlist. For Valentinus and his followers, the gospel story is not a rudimentary biography of a single individual, pieced together from reminiscences of eyewitnesses or those who had known eyewitnesses, but an allegory in which the sun's cycle, from its birth in Aries when spring begins to its death in Pisces 12 months later, symbolically reflects the spiritual cycle of the Gnostic initiate on his journey towards spiritual liberation or enlightenment. This is why Valentinus' claim that Jesus died in the 12th month, March, the month of Pisces, was so crucial to his case, and why Irenaeus was at such pains to refute it. There is no reason to suppose that this and other Gnostic heresies, which Irenaeus condemned so roundly and at times parodies so shamefully in his 5-volume work, were new ideas that had parasitically attached themselves to a history-based Christianity. Irenaeus, Orthodoxy's first systematic apologist, writing about 185 AD, goes to great lengths to prove that Jesus exercised his ministry over many years in order to counter the contention of various Gnostic groups, principally the followers of Valentinus, that Jesus taught for 1 year only, and further that he suffered in the 12th month. An idle piece of pedantic squabbling, we might be tempted to conclude, but we would be wrong to conclude this. The controversy was not just over any arbitrary 12-month period. It concerned the solar year, which begins at the spring equinox, and Valentinus' claim is absolutely startling. The career of Jesus is connected with the sun's annual journey through the heavens, and he implies that the various stages of it correspond to the other signs of the zodiac. A few quick, though important, observations. First, the weakness of Reverend Darlison's book is he doesn't take the physical incarnation and the historical reality of Jesus seriously. And that seems to be a problem with everybody who thinks like him. They don't even think his existence was necessary. Now, but the difference between Mark's gospel and the other so-called synoptic gospels of Matthew and Luke is they take stories written down by Mark, add a few of their own, and then bring in a collection of sayings of Jesus that scholars called Q. Okay? Now, if Jesus weren't real, and even if they didn't think Jesus were important, then they wouldn't have done any of that. Now, secondly, the physical resurrection of Jesus is critical to the success of Christianity, because without it, certainly in the case of Mark, you're just looking at another mystery religion. Those were a dime a dozen in the Roman Empire. We have them today. We have Madonna with her Kabbalah, Tom Cruise with Scientology. We have the Freemasons. From them, we got the Mormons. Jungian psychology. I'm really big into C.G. Jung. Jungian psychology is heavily influenced by the mystery traditions, preeminently the story of Psyche and Cupid. And I'm not ashamed of that. You do have to be upfront about it, though. Now, many people think these techniques are demonic because only demons use them. But Satan is not a creator. He's a counterfeiter. He stole all of this from God. And with Mark, we could properly use these techniques, but we formally repudiated them, probably because of one of the battle scars from our battles with the Gnostics. Think of it as a technology that stirs you up psychologically and opens you up to change. Okay, now what that change is and whom you serve are critical. Because in this world, you serve two people, one of two. You serve Jesus or you serve Satan. And if you're running around talking about the Christ consciousness, you're serving Satan, because that's Satan trying to steal the Christ from Jesus. This technology was not completely abandoned. It was resurrected, just in different forms. The Roman Catholic Church has their general Roman calendar. It's their name for their liturgical calendar, their annual liturgical calendar. I'm sure the Eastern Orthodox have the same thing. You live through that calendar every year. Now, I go to the Cathedral of Hope here in Dallas. That's a gay church. We follow the liturgical calendar. So it was kind of a shock to walk in the church during Lent to see everybody wearing black. And even the lighting was changed. The whole demeanor, the physical demeanor of the church had been altered. As I say, live through. Now, we Christians are de facto Aristotelians. And with Aristotle, the body was part of the soul. Okay, we will never be complete without a physical resurrection. So I double down. To separate Christ from the physical incarnation of Jesus is satanic. It is de facto Antichrist. Much later in church history, you have the Rosary. Okay, now Pope Pius V in the 16th century, properly so, explicitly connected the Rosary to the liturgical calendar. Now, in this Bootcamp for Saints series, I'm going to do several rosaries, and I'm going to cover all the mysteries of Jesus and the Blessed Virgin. See, they even call them mysteries. My final criticism of Darlison. The details of Jesus' life fit the stories in the Zodiac so perfectly because Mark made sure they did. We didn't make up Jesus as a fictional character modeled on the Zodiac. See, what happens, Mark would rework the stories of Jesus, just like a stonemason would rework a stone to go into a tower. Now, as I'll cover briefly in this video, under the rules of Greco-Roman historiography, that's perfectly acceptable as long as you were straightforward with what you were doing. And again, I'll cover that soon. But in the meantime, even without our rampant fungal infestation, we all have rough edges we need to smooth out. Not for salvation that only comes from the physical sacrifice of Jesus Christ, but to psychologically get out of our own way so that we can truly love God. Otherwise, you're just projecting something up there and calling it God, and you're really just loving yourself. The zodiac was a universally available, well-known format to do that with. Year after year after year, or even day after day if you want to, you cycle through each sign over and over and over again, meditating upon the person of Jesus and his life. You keep revisiting those facets of your personality, those different parts of your physical body. After a few years, you look back and you're a completely different person. Be an amazing person or an incredibly demonic person. But if you go with Christ, you're going to be building up those good works at the same time. Other than the general lack of urgency when it comes to the historical reality of Jesus, Reverend Darlison's book is solid. He's got a solid handle on this. For too long, the debate has centered on the historicity of the gospel accounts, and this has brought about a polarization of opinion which has tended to obscure their spiritual value. Both sides, literalist and liberal, have rejected the poetic dimension. But, as Schopenhauer reminds us, history is the antithesis of poetry. History concerns only individual things. Poetry concerns universal truths. This antithesis between poetry and history is what I'm going to talk about at the very end. By structuring his story on the zodiac, Mark has given it a cosmic dimension. His hero is an individual like Abraham and Moses, but his message is universal. The zodiacal way is the way we all must travel in the spiritual life. Jesus may have walked the road before us, but as far as Mark is concerned, he does not walk it on our behalf. Mark tells us that we must take up the cross and follow Jesus, Mark 10:21. We have to drink the same cup and be baptized with the same baptism, Mark 10:38, if we want the same reward. Using timeless metaphors drawn from the zodiacal cycle, Mark has given us a textbook of the spiritual life, a life lived in harmony with the universe, a life of holiness, wholeness, which can only be obtained with great effort and at great personal cost. There's also the possibility that, as we learn about these universal principles, we are learning about the career of one, about whom history has bequeathed us little more than a name. That's not true. We have many details about the life of Jesus, and when dealing with Jesus, you must show respect for both dialectical theses, his historical reality and his reality as a cosmic logos, whose life embodied these principles and whom we can call our brother and our exemplar. Now, when I talk about the rules of Greco-Roman historiography, I rely mostly on Why Are There Differences in the Gospels by Michael Licona. I would sum up the rules as follows. You must capture the character of your subject and his work. As for the specific data details of his life, you can bend, but you cannot break, and you cannot make stuff up. Dr. Licona demonstrates that, compared to great pagan historians like Plutarch, the Gospel writers are much more conservative when they quoted the actual words of Jesus. There's a lot less drift and verbiage with them than it is with the pagans. Mark does interesting things with the details of Jesus' life. This is from the introduction to this gospel in the New American Bible. It recounts what Jesus did in a vivid style, where one instant follows directly upon another. In this almost breathless narrative, Mark stresses Jesus' message about the kingdom of God now breaking into human life as good news, and Jesus himself as the gospel of God. Jesus is the Son whom God has sent to rescue humanity by serving and by sacrificing his life. Darlison also comments on this. For example, St. Augustine, 354 to 430 AD, considered Mark to be the least valuable gospel because, he said, it was merely an abbreviated version of Matthew and Luke. In addition, its somewhat rough and ready style, frenetic pace, episodic quality, colloquial language, and unsophisticated syntax contributed to the indifference with which it was viewed. Mark's narrative is breathless, frenetic, episodic, because in his case, the overarching zodiacal organization is just as important as the actual episodes. This makes these episodes all greater together than the sum of their parts. This gospel also has the hallmarks of mystery. The unfolding of Mark's story about Jesus is sometimes viewed by interpreters as centered around the term mystery. The word is employed just once, at Mark 4:11, in the singular, and its content there is the kingdom, the open secret that God's reign is now breaking into human life with its reversal of human values. There's a related sense in which Jesus' real identity remained a secret during his lifetime, according to Mark, although demons and demoniacs knew it. Jesus warned against telling of his mighty deeds and revealing his identity, an injunction sometimes broken. Further, Jesus teaches by parables, according to Mark, in such a way that those outside the kingdom do not understand, but only those to whom the mystery has been granted by God. Mark thus shares with Paul, as well as other parts of the New Testament, an emphasis on election and upon the gospel as Christ and his cross. But the gospel is not just organized by the zodiac. The framework of Mark's gospel is partly geographical. Galilee, through the area across the Jordan, and through Jericho to Jerusalem. Only rarely does Jesus go into Gentile territory, but those who acknowledge him there and the centurion who confesses Jesus at the cross presage the gospel's expansion into the world beyond Palestine. For example, in the north, we have what today is called the Golan Heights, including Mount Hermon, which Donald Trump just gave to Israel. This is the highest point in Israel. In the south, we have the Dead Sea, the lowest point in Israel. In fact, it's the lowest point in the whole world. In the north, we have the Transfiguration, Leo, kingship, divine splendor. In the south, we have Scorpio, death, regeneration, the secret gospel of Mark, which most scholars think is a fraud. I don't. I guarantee you Mark wrote this. It fits in perfectly with Scorpio and the location. There's even a brief scene in Jericho, which is the lowest city geographically in the world. In the gospel we have today, Jesus just goes into Jericho, and then he just leaves. Nothing apparently happened in between. That alone should tell you something's missing. Mark's other gospel by Scott G. Brown covers the other details in this narrative very nicely. You can almost consider this another textbook helpful to the course. Mark's other gospel is centered around a letter written by Clement of Alexandria to a man named Theodore. Scholars of Clement think the letter is authentic, but they come short on coming to an opinion about the gospel section that he cites, this missing part of the gospel of Mark's gospel. But since the letter was specifically written about that section, then you can only conclude if it's authentic, then the section is authentic. I'm going to hold off reading the actual citation from Mark until Scorpio, because that's where it belongs. You can find it online and read it yourself. But I will read part of Clement's actual letter, because it tells you a lot about how Mark's gospel was put together and why it was put together. It 100% supports everything that I'm telling you so far. Now keep in mind as I read this, nobody knew until decades after this fragment was discovered, or at least nobody admitted, that Mark's gospel was organized around the zodiac. As for Mark, then, during Peter's stay in Rome, he wrote an account of the Lord's doing, not, however, declaring all of them, nor yet hinting at the mystic ones or the secret ones, but selecting what he thought most useful for increasing the faith of those who were being instructed, the beginners. But when Peter died a martyr, Mark came over to Alexandria, bringing both his own notes and those of Peter, from which he transferred to his former book the things suitable to those studies which make for progress toward knowledge. Okay, so, if you look at evolution of biology or evolution of text, you see that you already have a mark circulating around, and now you have another mark here. Okay, so that's going to cause problems with textual traditions just by the fact that something like that happened. Thus he composed a more spiritual gospel for the use of those who were being perfected. That's a term for mystery. Nevertheless, he did not divulge the things not to be uttered, nor did he write down the hierophanic teachings of the Lord. So he wrote down more stuff, but there's stuff that he didn't write down. But to the stories already written, he added yet others, and moreover brought in certain traditions of which he knew the interpretation would, as a mystagogue, lead the hearers into the innermost sanctuary of that truth hidden by 7 veils. Thus in some, he prepared matters, neither grudgingly nor incautiously in my opinion, and dying, he left his composition to the church in Alexandria, where it even yet is very securely kept, being read only to those who are being initiated into the great mysteries. And again, there's nothing wrong with the mystery tradition. It works. There's a reason why people did it for hundreds of years and for thousands of years. It's just, what are you doing it for? Okay? A doctor can heal or he can torture. Now, by the way, you know what holiday is in Scorpio? Halloween, All Hallows Eve. If you read the fragment, you'll see that it fits perfectly into Scorpio. One final thing to discuss. Years ago, when I was a Trotskyite Marxist, I studied dialectical materialism. It's the logic of motion and change. And one of the important concepts of dialectical materialism is the unity and interpolarity of opposites. Now, you know the yin and yang symbol? Okay, you'll notice there's a white spot in the black part and a black spot in the white part. That's what that is. And that's what you see in the interpolarity of the historical and cosmic reality of Jesus. Okay? Or to use other well-known terminology, these are the thesis and antithesis which you must unite in synthesis, which once again is greater than the sum of its parts. Each age bears the characteristics of the equinoctial constellation and also its opposite. So the age of Aries shows the influence of Libra, the balance, the sign of relationships, covenants. Virgo, the opposite of Pisces in the sky, is the sign of modesty and service, in addition to physical virginity. All these are prominent themes of the Christian story and are characters of the Virgin Mary. She and the Piscean Jesus stand as twin poles of the Virgo-Pisces axis. And so by minimizing or even blowing off either of these theses of Christ's reality, you lose the triumph of their synthesis. Thus I triple down. To separate the Christ from the physical person and historical person of Jesus is satanic, and I would add, vulgar. I see a lot of Christian YouTube videos about the dialectical interpolarity of opposition, and they think it's satanic. Well, that's what a battery is. Is a battery satanic? Once again, Satan is not a creator, he's a counterfeiter. He stole all these techniques from God. It's the same with the zodiac in general. You can use it for divination, which is bad, or you can use it to glorify God, which is what it's for. So this is the end of my quick survey for Bootcamp for Saints. As we go through the year, as we go into each sign, I'm going to talk about the Gospel of Mark, talk about my life, try to relate it to myself. I invite you to do the same. It's going to make you a much better person. It's going to help you get those good works going. I'll also be making note of the liturgical year, what part of the year we're in, talking about the rosary, praying the rosaries. And I hope you enjoy, and I hope you continue to track me. God bless.